Tom Winter, we start with you and your reporting. What's the latest?
Right. So a couple of different things, Nicole. Our understanding of this is this all began yesterday, really in earnest, when the Trump Organization attorneys met with 8 or 9 prosecutors from Cy Vance's office. This, according to Ron Fischetti, who's the attorney for the Trump Organization, asking them, don't file these charges against us. Don't file the charges against the Trump Organization. Now, Fischetti says that the prosecutors in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office are kind of circling tax evasion charges potentially against the company for benefits that they provided to Alan Weisselberg, perhaps others, including the use of a company car or a company apartment, which they did not then properly document and file the taxes for. That's against the law. I don't know if I really see here a path forward where that would be the only thing that the Manhattan District Attorney's Office would seek to charge the Trump Organization with. Time will tell. Obviously, we'll know by this time next week. So that is our understanding, is that this is going to be filed sometime next week. We don't know the exact timing of that at this point. Trump Organization's attorneys have called it completely outrageous that they would consider filing this. But I think time will tell once we get a totality and see the fullness of the charges. Just a little bit of analysis here. The Times, in what you just read, said that they hadn't previously reported about the Trump Organization could be as a potential target for charges. That's something that we had previously identified as a target for charges. You can charge the organization itself. So let's think about this. And I'm not speaking to this with any sort of direct knowledge, but just from an analysis standpoint, you could go after the company for racketeering. There are those types of charges in New York. You could go after them for conspiracy or involving a scheme if this was part of a pattern and practice. And as you know, well, Nicole, we spoke about this when I interviewed Jennifer Weisselberg. They were looking at other apartments that may have gone, and she's the former daughter-in-law of Alan Weisselberg. They were looking at apartments that were given to her and her then husband. So I think that this is probably going to be a little bit broader than that. But again, time will tell. The only thing we know for sure is that the Trump Organization, that is the heart of the Trump family business and former President Trump's business, is expected to be charged next week.
Your reporting on this has been fantastic, and I do appreciate the distinction. I just want to build on what Tom Winter is reporting with you, Dan Goldman. I mean, even in the story in the Times today, it says the inquiry is also examining the organization's statements to insurance companies about the value of various assets and any role that its employees, including Mr. Weisselberg, may have played in hush money payments to 2 women during the 2016 presidential campaign. I mean, it sounds, as Tom Winter is reporting, extremely broad. It sounds like an examination of all criminal conduct. Is that the right way to think about it?
I think that's right. And I do think that we need to take with a grain of salt what is being fed to the New York Times by Ron Fischetti, a great and venerable defense lawyer who I did a trial against, but who is a defense lawyer and is going to try to shade things in favor of his client. So I think Tom's word of caution is very well taken here. I would be very surprised if they charged the Trump Organization simply with fringe benefits and executive compensation for tax evasion. And we know, for example, Nicole, that the Trump Organization misled their books and records and the regulatory authorities on the Michael Cohen hush money payments. So to the extent that they are going to be examining books and records charges or tax evasion charges, they will be looking at that. I would expect any indictment would be much broader than what the Times is reporting today. And if it does, the other thing that I think that's very noteworthy here is a lot of these charges in New York State carry very light penalties. It's very interesting to me that, and it doesn't seem to be coming from the Manhattan DA's office, but it's interesting and not surprising that they would approach the Trump Organization to tell them that they're considering to charge them, because that would be almost a death blow to the Trump Organization. Every single bank would call their loans if the Trump Organization is indicted. No bank will ever do business with an indicted company. And there's no way that the Trump Organization has enough capital to pay off all their loans. So they would be effectively in default of their loans and would almost certainly have to go into bankruptcy. That's a huge step. And there are all sorts of protocols and there's all sorts of evaluation that any prosecutor's office would do before they did that. In this case, New York State has a memo, the DA's office has a memo with 5 factors. And without going through all of them, none of the factors really favor the Trump organization. So it's not at all surprising that they would approach the Trump organization with a heads up and perhaps engage in some sort of settlement negotiations to avoid indictment.
Let me take a step back here and try to understand this development. I mean, it seems that if you take everything that is in the public space, Michael Cohen's sworn testimony, I believe he was on his way to prison or on a break, I think in questioning from Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, where he testifies and is never questioned to have testified falsely, that the company regularly fraudulently claimed valuations. We know from New York Times investigative, I think Pulitzer Prize-winning reporting that he is leveraged to the hilt, so much so that national security officials worried it could be exposure for a sitting president to have that much debt. Are you saying that if a company is charged criminally, Dan Goldman, that it is almost surely putting that company on a pathway to bankruptcy?
I think so. I think basically banks have very strict regulations that prevent them from doing business with indicted corporations. And so they would probably have an out clause in their loan documents that says if a company is indicted, that they could call their loans right away. And there's no way, as you put it, that Trump could pay off the Trump organization could pay off all the loans. So this is sort of an end run to get to Donald Trump in some effect, to essentially, I think at this point, acknowledge that right now they don't have the evidence to indict Donald Trump. But what they do have is enough evidence to indict his company, which would decimate him, at least financially, so to speak, even if it weren't to put him in prison. If Alan Weisselberg cooperates, and I've been one of many who has said that Trump really cannot be indicted without Alan Weisselberg's cooperation. Michael Cohen is not enough in and of himself, partially because of some credibility concerns, but also because he was not intertwined. He was not very involved with the accounting details, the tax filings, those types of things. So you would need someone else who really knows that stuff to indict, to cooperate in order to indict Donald Trump. But Alan Weisselberg represents the company in its loan applications, insurance applications, and its tax filings. And so certainly he, as representative of the company, would know where all the bodies are buried.
So one more question about what the evidence might look like if they're considering criminal charges against the company. I mean, no less than the United States Supreme Court, packed with Trump appointees, made the decision that put Donald Trump's taxes and all that financial information that he'd fought and used the entire apparatus of the federal government to keep secret. I believe his accountants were subpoenaed, and the Supreme Court decision cleared the pathway for all of their files to make their way to these investigators. What would the picture look like for them to be considering criminal charges against the ex-president's company?
So the biggest factor, I think, in this case is whether the conduct is pervasive. In order to charge a corporation, it's not simply, oh, they misrepresented Michael Cohen's hush money payments, so therefore we're going to charge the company. It would have to be a long duration of years, pervasive and consistent criminal conduct that just made this effectively a criminal organization. I mean, they don't have to go so far as to prove that, but a prosecutor would not bring charges against a corporation without persistent and pervasive misconduct. So that's what we're talking about here. Tom mentioned state-level RICO, Little RICO, or what's called enterprise corruption in New York. That's more difficult to prove than federal RICO charges, but it does carry a much heftier penalty. And so I am curious whether the DA's office is really considering a RICO charge here, because frankly, I don't think that the charges that are going to come down against Alan Weisselberg and the potential jail time, which is very much lighter than in federal court, I don't think that's going to coerce him to cooperate. Now, that's speculation. and no one wants to go to jail for any amount of time. But it's entirely possible he would get no jail time at all for whatever he's charged with in New York, which doesn't even have a bank fraud statute. So a lot of this gets to be inside baseball, Nicole. But the point here is that what we are likely going to see if there is an indictment is pervasive conduct by the Trump organization with Alan Weisselberg as the representative. And there might be individual charges against Alan Weisselberg for getting some unnecessary or excessive or unreported benefits from the organization that he did not report to tax authorities.